Good afternoon. Wow, what great passion. Muskegon has a lot to look forward to. I do a lot of work in communities, and I'll say the common denominators are usually leadership, passion, and unrealistic goals. So if you keep those set, then you'll do well. The slide that I have up top is of Detroit, in Detroit that I grew up in Ann Arbor, and I never knew this Detroit. This Detroit was known by my parents and my grandparents. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we look at revitalizing places, and I'm happy to announce that I am involved in the resurrection of Detroit. It's something that's very passionate to me, and I think with all Michigan cities. So my name is Terry Sanford, and I'm going to talk to you today about a few of the most ubiquitous and nebulous terms that I know of in the English language, and that's place, sense of place, and placemaking. I realized as I joined the governor's task force on sense of place roundtable for his urban initiatives that we were really talking different languages when we talked about the ideas of place. It became clear that they were really talking about an economic development strategy that involved placemaking. But I know that through classical economics, place was never really a part of the equation. A good place was considered a prosperous place because it had the ability to get natural resources and labor and capital. And that's why cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh thrived. Place was really the intangibles, or the things that didn't matter in economic development. Schools, roads, infrastructure were things that were mere byproducts. So the Rouge River, I mean, that's obviously an extreme example, but that would have been considered a good place. But as planners and designers, we look at those intangibles as how do we make great places? What makes a livable city? What are the attributes that people want? And what I will give the governor credit for in the new administration is that he understands that the dynamic of where Michigan sat in the production world has changed. And so in order to attract talent and investment, we need to go back to making good places, because that's the only way we're going to be competitive. So I give him credit for that, because as we've seen, industry will move. When those common denominators change and it becomes cheaper to do it somewhere else, they will move, and it's what they leave behind that we need to deal with and grow from. So place is easy. Place is where something is, an address, a street corner. But what gives it its sense of place are the characteristics that make it unique, that give it identity, or more importantly, what give you an emotional response when you're there. It could be materials, landscape, a kind of a regional vernacular. If you think about Mackinac Island as a place that we think of, you know it when you experience it. It speaks to you in a certain way. So sense of place is a combination of all of that. When you talk about emotion, you begin to look at history, or a place that you gather, coffee shops. That's what creates that sense of place. So imagine for a minute you were dropped off here and you had to figure out where you were. Now this building is a masterpiece of modern architecture. Now, modern architecture by its very nature stretches those parameters of proportion and human scale. But if you look at the fabric buildings, you can begin to get an idea of where you are. It grounds you in a place. Neoclassical architecture, Renaissance period, old buildings, the hilltops behind, you could probably figure that you were in Italy or Spain. It would be the Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain. But you get an idea how a place gives its history through its architecture. But imagine for a minute you are standing at this place. I've never been here. I have no desire to go here, but I do know that if I were to be there, I would often ask myself, where the heck am I? It has no context. It has no fabric. It's really a city of object buildings. And I guess when they don't perform, they implode them and they start off with something new. I actually have a friend whose parents go to the Bellagio. They think that's going to Italy. I had a friend, I had a friend that said, I don't go to Disney, so they said, well, why don't you go to Disney? It's wonderful. You can stay in this place, and you can go see Old Faithful. You walk down this trail, and you see Old Faithful. Now, I said, no, you're going to see a pump that shoots water in the air. If I want to go see Old Faithful, I'm going to take my kids out west. So this is kind of what we've become. I mean, I know Gustav Eiffel did not design his tower. He designed it to be an entrance to a great World's Fair, not holding a 16-lane street in the middle of the desert. So the one issue that I guess my voice on the roundtable is apart from economic development, the government, I guess, would like to think that this creation of place and placemaking as an economic engine are two sides of the same coin, but they really aren't. Here's an example in Grand Rapids of the Medical Mile, which has been really great for economic development. It's been a wonderful asset to the regional community, but I don't know anybody that would really say that this created a place or a sense of place. I mean, it's really a single-use district that doesn't engage the street and has very little trickle down into the community as a whole. So my contention is that the creation of place must be as exact and intentional as the destruction of place has been, through planning laws, policies, incentive packages, listening to retailers and how we need to do things and buy things has all led to kind of this destruction of our urban form. So when I stand on a street corner and I can't see the Staples sign from the Walmart parking lot due to the curvature of the earth, that's nature's way of telling you you're not defining space very well. So when we look at cities, there's really two aspects, context and scale, and they're really both scale issues. But in the terms of kind of human scale and how we perceive our environment, context is the interrelationship of things. When we look at a project, most Midwestern cities were developed on a 660 by 300 foot grid with a hierarchy of streets. You had arterial streets, secondary streets, and development usually occurred amongst the commercial streets at intersections that could support it and in a context and scale in which it was supportable. Very rarely anywhere in the Midwest do we have developed, even if you look at Michigan Avenue in Chicago, 1,000 feet lineal shopping is about all people can tolerate, both sides of the street. Then you get tired and you want to go somewhere else, you're overloaded. So 1,000 feet is the maximum. So when we look at any project, we look first at where its context is. This is a project that we worked on along corridor, and corridors are tricky because corridors change. And you have to be very careful when you revitalize an area, is that corridor ready for it? Obviously, at one point in history, this area was able to sustain commercial activity, but things change. So we look at the strength of the neighborhood. How is the neighborhood growing? What can it support from a market? What's the traffic? Is the building historic? Can we adaptively reuse it? And what is our strategy? So in this case, we looked at all those factors, and our recommendation and how we proceeded was to redevelop this property. But what's also most important, we were fortunate, we were pleased to win an award for this project. During the project, we understood that we had to engage the local community, and part of what I do when I go to communities is talk about bringing in local investment. It's one thing to talk about economic development and steal businesses from the suburbs, and everyone wants to steal somebody. I'd like to steal a cheese lady. I'll just go out and say that right now. But everybody's mindset is I want to take that. I like what they're doing there. I want to steal it and bring it in here. Really what we need to do is look at how we can bring things up and start things new and give people an opportunity. In this case, we went out and found places, people that were already interested doing business in the area that we thought could support. Typically what we see in the revitalization process is it starts with a restaurant, usually small format, preferably some ethnic, something unique. People will go to an area for a restaurant more than anything else, and you start to generate traffic. Oftentimes then a second restaurant will come in, larger format, and then you can start to see the boutiques and coffee shops. And that's exactly what happened on this corridor. And this is the scale in which I love to work because it happens very rapidly and you can exact a lot of change in a short period of time. Restaurants, just so you know, used to be in a downtown, a healthy downtown anywhere. 24% of the businesses were restaurants. Today, that number is closer to 45%. Good, healthy, sustainable downtowns. Again, restaurants are the new anchors even in the commercial retail world. And this project's a little bit different. This was closer in context to the inner city. This was in a neighborhood that already began to revitalize. It could support and could really use an injection of mixed use. This property that it replaced was a single-use office building built in the 70s, so there really was no way to adaptively reuse it. So then it became an issue of scale and context. 8 stories, it was about to accommodate what the surrounding areas would be. We had commercial, there was office, residential, and retail, all of which supported the surrounding areas. This became a catalyst for that. So how do we as humans, and there's a lot of talk about scale, that's another one of those fuzzy words, but as human beings, we really react to our environment based on our capabilities and our proportions. Why do we feel comfortable in a place? Why do we feel uncomfortable? There's a lot of senses and feelings that lead to that. So if the average person is 5.5 feet tall, And our upward angle of mobility is about 60 degrees to be comfortable with. So what that means is if you're standing on a sidewalk, you can really experience about a 4 to 5 story building on most average street. So to me, this is the area in which you really put the details in. I was recently in a conversation with a community where they were fighting over 6 stories, 8 stories. My point of it was, I don't really care. I mean, if the building, at that point you lose perception of what that context is. If you can support 6 stories, you can support 8 stories, if the market can. But if that 8 stories allows that developer then to take those the monies and put that into the details on the street, that's ultimately what you're going to experience and what makes a place good and not. So here's an example of 2 cross sections. They're almost identical in the size, the placement of the street trees, the massing is the same, the proportions are the same. So what makes one walkable or human and the other not? I mean, as a human, we are basically slow-moving upright bipods. We travel at about 3 miles an hour, and that is those are what our senses are tuned to and how we experience things. So we like to have a permeable and open edge. Jane Jacobs called it the eyes on the street, that we feel comfortable with. Our senses like to make a transition from private to public. So if I'm on a sidewalk, I understand that I'm in a public realm. As I move if I move up into the building, I enter into semi-private and into private quarters. That's why houses are designed the way they are. We have a distinction between front and rear. And again, the detailing is in proportion to our size. So what's happened is we begin to stretch the scale. And we plop things where they shouldn't go. So even with this building put into a pedestrian, and this use put into a pedestrian environment, you know, they try to bring the building down in scale on the bays, but they really don't add any detail. This is kind of a really example of how we're stretching this idea of scale. And it doesn't just stop at the bay size and the lack of detail. It goes to, well, now we need bigger roads to accommodate the traffic. We need bigger roads for snowplows. We need bigger streets. And things begin to then just get enormous. And we start to, again, lose that perception of scale and closure. Not to mention, it blurs the scale of what even a grocery store should be. And how much food should we buy when we go to a grocery store? All of that is interconnected to the same issue of scale. But when it all works, it can be magical. And we know that proportions, we know how we respond to proportions. It's an unnatural science, but it's studied enough to know, we know a good place when we see it. That sense of closure, if you have a 1-to-1 ratio, or if you go into a room, a 12 by 12 living room with a 12-foot ceiling, that's where 1 or 2 people will feel most comfortable. That is our ideal closure as a human being. So on a street, a 1-to-1 closure is also well. So on an 80-foot street, if you have an 8-story building, that's a 1-to-1 ratio, and you feel very close, very close there. We don't often build 8-story buildings in the Midwest, so we usually work on a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3, which would be which works well, and that's you have to pour in the detail. Our typical suburban developments in the United States are usually at 1-to-6, and if you talk about a commercial corridor out on a commercial street, it's 1-to-12, so you lose any sense of closure at all. But those are guidelines. Here's obviously this exceeds, but you still get a great sense of closure. Everybody feels differently. When you come into areas that are tight and you open up into vast spaces, usually you get a huge interaction or a huge reaction from your spirit as you come through a corridor and then you open into a grand space. This is a project. There was a lot of discussion about the height of this building, whether the building should be 80 feet on both sides. And basically I said, look, if this street, would it be twice as good a street if it had two 80-foot buildings on either side? I wish they would have poured more detail into the 35 or the building that they had. I think that would make it a better street. But it gives you an idea that that it's not all just one solution. For me, this is my perfect sense of closure. This is Annapolis, Maryland. This is about a 1-to-2 ratio. This is the detail and the scale that I love. And this makes me feel good. We should also remember that no matter what we're talking about economic development, and we're talking about the creation of place. What we're really talking about is places that we love. This is my family. We spend a lot of time in Nantucket, and it's a place that we love. It speaks to us in a way that it touches us. The quirky streets, the architecture, everything about it. So when you put it at that perspective, is it about economic development? Yes. But is it really about creating places that attach emotion to people? Is ultimately where we're trying to get to, and where we should always keep our eye on that prize. So I think that in order to, and remember that the default mode for redevelopment is generally crap. So if we don't have proper tools in place, form-based codes and things to prop up our design elements in new buildings, then that's what we're going to get. So with that, I guess I'll end in my new favorite hero, as Brady Hoke would end every session, as Go Blue. But here I think it's Wahoo. So thank you very much.